Welcome to Millinery and Monsters. My name is Aimee A and I'm a Melbourne-based costumier, milliner and maker. Tonight we will be taking a look into the shady past of all that glows in the dark. Over the 20th century, our understanding of the science behind luminescence has not been without its tragedies. But from the horrific tale of the ill-fated Radium Girls of the 1920s through to the novelty toys of the 1970s, we have uncovered a great deal. Tonight's creation will be a wink at a vintage advertising favourite of mine, the glows-in-the-dark sticker. We will use this time to look for the light in the dark as we uncover the history and societal understanding of luminescence. To begin with, I have printed my design. This is ready to be traced off onto the calico, which I've already stretched over a hoop, so this is nice and tight. Once this is all traced across, I will paint my colours on. I have already done a little paint swatch so I know what colour green I'm going to go for. I have also purchased some glow-in-the-dark paint, a product I haven't actually used before, so we will see where that takes us. And I have also used the glow-in-the-dark paint over a couple of these squares just to see how they go. It has dried pretty much clear, which sounds good to me. So let's get started. So I am going to use a D bracket to attach the hoop to the side of the table. You definitely don't want to make it too tight, you don't want to damage your hoop or your table. But get it nice and sturdy enough so that you know you can pull it around if you do need to. Take the design, put it underneath the hoop. You can already sort of see it through the fabric, but some fabrics might be a little bit more opaque. And then you're just going to use a couple of pins to pin it into place. Right through the paper, right through the fabric, so that it doesn't shift as you're tracing it off. Now, if you're like me and you do not own a lightbox, a simple method that I discovered is just taking a lamp and putting it underneath what you're working on. I just turn this one upside down and allow the light to shine through to illuminate what you are working on. When looking at all that glows, let's look at some of the different types of luminescence and where we may know them from. Firstly, bioluminescence. This is the light emitted by living organisms using an internal chemical reaction. Think deep-sea creatures and fireflies. Then we have photoluminescence. This is the emission of light from a molecule or atom that has absorbed electromagnetic energy. Two branches of this are fluorescence and phosphorescence. Fluorescence occurs fractions of a second after the energy source, or light, is removed, not altering the spin of the electron. Whereas phosphorescence will often change the direction of an electron's spin, causing the energy to burn slower and glow longer than fluorescence. The glow-in-the-dark toys and star kits that many of us grew up with are an example of a photoluminescence-based product. Next we have chemoluminescence, the emission of light caused by a chemical reaction which we would recognize in glow sticks and glow bands. The reaction in such products occurs when the user cracks the band or stick, breaking the internal capsule holding the secondary chemical, causing them to mix and glow. Finally, we have radioluminescence. This is created by the bombardment of ionizing radiation. Think Homer Simpson and the glow of the nuclear power plant. And with radioluminescence, we will start our story. If you will recall from our previous episode, German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen discovered the X-ray in 1895. Within the weeks that follow, a man by the name of Henry Becquerel identified radioactivity. As radioactivity was still a new phenomenon in the early 20th century, the long-term effects were not yet seen. So given that the rays could not be felt and there seemed to be no immediate effect on the exposed skin, it was widely believed that X-rays were harmless. However, reports of X-ray related injuries began to surface as early as 1896, and by the late 1890s there were numerous reports of injury, including radiation skin burns and loss of hair. Come 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie would report their discovery of a new glow-in-the-dark chemical element, radium, a radioactive substance found in trace amounts in uranium. It wouldn't be long before radium was dubbed the wonder substance of the 20th century, said to cure everything from arthritis to cancer. Not long after Marie Curie was able to isolate radium into a pure metal form in 1902, American inventor William J. Hammer would obtain a small amount of this radium. Using a mixture of radium powder, water and glue, he was able to create a glow-in-the-dark paint. This wondrous paint would be used on such items as watch dials, aircraft controls, and military instruments, allowing them to be viewed in the dark. World War I would see a huge demand for these dials, and so from 1917 and 1929, hundreds of young women were employed as dial painters, with an emphasis being placed on their delicate work from nimble hands, painting on average 250 dials per day. This highly coveted job would pay up to 3 times the weekly wage of other factory jobs available. The women would paint these dials using camel hair brushes and were encouraged to place the brushes to their lips to taper off the brush to a fine point countless times a day, each time ingesting a small amount of radium. The radium, they were told, not only was safe, but would give them a desirable rosy glow. These factories were so full of radium dust that by the end of their shift, the women would walk home with their skin, hair and clothing glowing, giving them the name of phantoms. In fact, they were so sure they were safe with this substance that some of the workers would even paint their teeth, clothes and fingernails with the paint just for fun. All the while, factory owners and scientists were not only limiting their exposure to the substance, but using cautionary protective masks, using lead-lined screens and tongs to handle the radium. Now that I have everything all painted up, I am going to step away for a while just to ensure that the glow-in-the-dark paint does have time to completely dry before I start on my beading. By the early 1920s, dial painters started falling ill with a multitude of mysterious symptoms, including, but not limited to, extensive teeth issues, debilitating joint pains, severe anemia, and in many cases their jaw bones appeared to be disintegrating, a symptom referred to as radium jaw by a New York dentist, Dr. Theodore Blum, as he linked these symptoms to the painter's line of work in 1924. As evidence to the harmful nature of radium began to surmount, companies such as US Radium began to smear the workers' claims, going to such lengths to not only discredit their story, but falsify evidence that radium was not the cause of these ailments. In 1925, Grace Fryer, a formal dial painter, having suffered many lost teeth, her jaw crumbling, and many painful abscesses, decided to sue US Radium for the pain and suffering that occurred due in large part to their negligence and lack of workers' rights. Although long-term effects of radiation could take years to present themselves, laws protecting workers' rights stipulated that claims could only be made up until 2 years after the injury was sustained. Partly due to this, it took almost 2 years to find an attorney to try the case, but come May 1927, Fryer and 4 other formal dial painters, Edna Hussman, Albina Laris, Quinta MacDonald, and Catherine Schaub, filed suit in New Jersey Supreme Court for $250,000 each in compensation for medical bills and pain and suffering. This case took the media by storm, dubbing the 5 women the Radium Girls. Naturally, US Radium denied all of the charges of knowingly allowing their workers to be poisoned, despite numerous reports of medical advice being given to and ignored by the company, including medical reports dating back to 1906, outlining the dangers of working with this substance. In fact, even one of US Radium's own publications contained a section called Radium Dangers, Injurious Effects. The trial would not be held until January of 1928, and by this time each of the women were gravely ill. Even Marie Curie would comment that she saw no hope for these women, indicating that her research showed no way to undo the damage once the substance is consumed. Curie herself would die in 1934 due to complications caused by prolonged exposure to radium. The case was met with public outrage and adjourned until June 1928. Though days before their reappearance, the women would settle outside of court for $10,000 each in compensation, in addition to medical expenses paid and a $600 a month annuity until their death. Fryer and Schaub died in 1933 at 34 and 30 years old respectively. Hussman died in 1939 at 37 years old. Laris the last surviving of the Radium Girls, died in 1946 at 51 years old. The courage of the Radium Girls to fight for their rights through a harrowing health battle saw changes in the industry's safety standards and extended the time period workers could discover work-related illness and claim compensation. And whilst their tales ended terribly, their case contributed to the scientific understanding of tolerance of radium levels. Let's, as respectfully as possible, move forward in time to the 1970s. By this time, the making of things that glow was refined down and non-toxic alternatives were found. Toy manufacturers began to cast their molds either in full or in part using zinc sulfide or strontium aluminate, mixing these phosphors into the plastic. These glow-in-the-dark toys were a huge hit and drove up sales in the toy market. Such an example of newfound interest were a reimagining of the Aurora Monster collection from 1962. Now, the Aurora Monster Models were a sprue-based toy assembly kit, which came in a beautifully designed collectible box. The first of the Aurora Monster Models was Frankenstein. Well, the monster, but it was sold as Frankenstein. This was sculpted by a man named Jack Lemmon based on the Marx wind-up Walker toy of the Frankenstein's monster. Now, I've given that a Google and I've just put that on the list of the do I need it, no I don't, do I want it, yes I do. So the original prototype of this monster model was shown at a toy convention in January of 1962. However, they received absolutely no orders until the final day of the convention, when the representatives were allowed to bring their families. Now, children ran straight to the Aurora stall and ran straight past the cars and the trucks and the planes, and they went straight for Frankenstein's monster. Me too, kid, me too. Having seen the kids' delight, a few California distributors decided to place orders also, and a few days following the convention, the phone started ringing off the hook, we want more monsters, we want more monsters. So they added in the Dracula and the Wolfman model kits to be released by Christmas of 1962. The following year, they made the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, and the Phantom of the Opera. And then the year after that, they released the Godzilla, King Kong, and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. By 1965, they had released Dr. Jekyll as Mr. Hyde, and within that same year, they released The Bride of Frankenstein and The Witch. These monster kits were really heavily advertised toward little boys. So with the release of the female characters, allegedly the little boys were not that interested, and they then went out about saying that little girls aren't interested in monsters and little girls don't buy the model kits. I feel that has more to do with the time and external social influence than it does with little girls not being interested in monsters. By the late 1960s, the sales of these monster kits did start to dwindle. However, then comes into play the magical world of glow-in-the-dark, and all of a sudden they had a new invigoration to their monster kits. They started to release sprue that had glow-in-the-dark pieces, a new collectible box, and the world was their oyster. Now that the piece is all put together, the braiding is in place and the backing wire is all ready to go. The next thing to do is to take a thin metal headband, some millinery wire, and some very thin malleable wire to create a stabilizing structure off the back of the headband so that when the piece is attached, the wearer is going to be comfortable and you're not going to worry about it sort of moving around too much when you're going about your business. Once that is all attached, we will do the same method with the strip of stretched out tulle to cover the entire wire structure, and that just makes for a nice little finish. Once you have a general position you're wanting this to go, what we need to do is start to wrap this thin wire around just to hold it in place. Make sure you're pulling nice and tight. Now that the wire structure is all set up, the next thing we're going to do is, as before, take our strips of tulle, give them a nice little stretch without pulling too hard or you will break it. And that just gives it a nice little curl. On my honeymoon many years ago, we went to Las Vegas and there was a vintage store there that had toys that, ooh, I wanted, but ooh, I could not afford. And I do remember seeing there, I believe it was a King Kong of the Aurora Monster kits, and I wanted it, but I could not afford it. Basically, all of these kits are now on my wish list, and I am on a hunt to track them down because I really do enjoy finding things. And I enjoy the story of finding things. So I did have a peek online. There are a couple available, mostly the Frankenstein's monster kits, but I think it's more fun trying to find them in the wild. So I'm going to keep hunting them down, and I'm very pleased with this decision. So the glow-in-the-dark kits renewed the sales, and going through the 1970s there was a new wave of Aurora Monster kits. I did actually recently go down to pick up a DVD box set of all of the classic Universal Monster movies, and I spoke to a local vintage store vendor about the Aurora Monster kits. He did say that they got one in maybe 5 years ago. I can't remember which. I think he might have said it was the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but he did say they're quite hard to come by in Australia, but again, we agreed. That's part of the fun. And finishing on a slightly lighter note, here is our headpiece in all of its glory. Hopefully this has inspired you to make a little bit of magic of your own. Until next time, happy haunting, and I will see you soon with a spooky little story. Bye! Thank you for joining me for tonight's tale of guts and glitter. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe below.